Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is going to be a quest for the best video. This is planar IEMs for gaming purposes, and you guys already know I think very highly of one planar and one planar alone. That is the Raptgo Hook X, which also has that bone conduction driver, but the Raptgo Hook X being open back, having that bone conduction driver, it does something very special in terms of how you hear things in game. The depth perception, the audio in terms of verticality, as well as things going on around you on the same level, things under you, everything is picked up with a level of specificity that feels very good for competitive gaming purposes. So how does the Dunu Talos, the Letshuoer Z12, as well as the Moondrop Stellaris stack up? Let's get into it. So first, I do want to just get a general disclaimer out there that this video has to be separated into segments for all three of these IEMs. Music listening playback compared to competitive gaming, and competitive gaming, of course, being this channel's focus. And I do just want to kind of get my sentiment out there that I think a lot of reviewers, just both written reviews as well as oral reviews, recorded reviews, etc., have a very fundamental lack of understanding of what competitive gaming needs require. I think that a lot of people are referring to competitive gaming as how immersive something sounds, whether or not something on a graph would be something that would give you good technicality for music listening playback, and trying to transfer that into a competitive gaming playback. And those things are definitely not one and the same. I can tell you that right now. There are things that look absolutely beautiful on graphs, and you take them in game, they are absolutely abysmal. All three of these planars definitely struggle for gaming purposes, and I'm going to start with the Z12, but I first want to talk about audio playback because all three of these IEMs are actually amazing for different purposes for audio playback. The Z12 is no slouch for my particular library, which includes a lot of rap, R&B, a lot of right now the new Red Hot Chili Peppers album, a lot of Sublime, Post Malone. I listen to a lot of female vocals, male vocals, instrumentals, etc. Okay, it's a wide array of everything except basically country and screamo. But on the Z12, I definitely get a sense of a V-shaped sound signature. The bass and sub-bass are definitely elevated here, and you get a nice punch. There's a few tracks that I listen to that just have a constant booming bass while other things are going on, where it definitely bleeds and you don't necessarily get that detail retrieval, that technicality. But in terms of the sub bass being where it is and being definitely emphasized and the bass being emphasized, I don't feel like I'm losing a lot in terms of the sound of female vocals and male vocals. Everything kind of sounds like it has a good balance. I would say that the treble definitely, I didn't take issue with the highs, but it's not the most detailed. It doesn't have a lot of sparkle, a lot of technicality, but again, a nice balanced experience that meshes so well together for my audio playback that anybody who is looking for a really nice fitting planar, I mean, these things are comfortable as heck. I could wear these for hours on end. They sound phenomenal when I'm listening to my audio playback. They sound phenomenal. And that's kind of where the buck stops. For competitive gaming purposes, you would almost think that that could transition well for things like Valorant, things like Apex Legends. And it does a fairly decent job in a left-right channel, 360-degree radius, trying to give you a cue, an emphasis of where somebody is, but it just falls behind because although I'm getting a signal of where somebody is, particularly let's stick to Valorant, I'm getting a signal as to where somebody is, but it's just not pinpoint depth perception and it's not pinpoint angling. So although somebody could be behind a wall, I might be peeking out and trying to have that crosshair placement, it's not an accurate perception of where exactly somebody is behind the wall. So a good little emphasis, I know somebody's there, but I don't know exactly where they are. So it's definitely hurting crosshair placement for Valorant. In terms of imaging above the head, soundstage is definitely not that high, not that great or wide, especially for music listening playback. And the same definitely carries over in game. In terms of Apex Legends, they definitely struggle to provide accurate depth perception when it comes to verticality. If somebody's 2 floors above me, if somebody's under me, there's definitely a difficulty And particularly when you throw in the poor separation when too many things are going on, it becomes even that much harder to try to figure out where somebody is above you or below you. And in a game like Apex Legends in particular, that could be game breaking for competitive purposes, because if somebody's reviving, if you crack somebody, they get away, they take a horizon cue, they get to a different floor, a different level of elevation. You need to know exactly where they are so they don't get a bat off, they don't get a revive off, because that millisecond of time of them getting that bat off could be a life or death scenario for you and your team in Apex Legends. Same thing for Valorant. When people were above me, let's say on split, if somebody was in heaven and I am down below, it almost is a mesh as though they are in the same field. So unless you hear that different footstep material, like if somebody's walking on wood or metal on a different surface, you kind of don't get that perception of where exactly they are. And again, it's just a slower crosshair placement in general, and definitely something that is going to be harmful for competitive gaming purposes. And for that reason, they will not be joining the Wallhack tier list. Dunu makes fantastic IEMs, and the Dunu Talos is definitely one of them. These are very good planar IEMs for audio listening purposes. My library sounded absolutely phenomenal, and there's really just a nice balance compared to the Z12, where you get nothing that really overpowers anything else. But I didn't find the detail retrieval, surprisingly, to be as good as other IEMs, despite having that very nice balance. But just to kind of give you guys an idea of the bass, I mean, you definitely get what you expect from a planar. It's quick and it's fun, but the sub bass definitely doesn't hit you nearly as hard as a lot of planars do. And that's probably a good thing, because you don't really want that sub bass to bleed into other areas of the tracks, especially if you're listening to things that have a ton of sub bass or bass in general that might bleed into, or have a tendency to bleed into, the mids. The bass is just a very, very clean texture throughout the lower end and never sounds muddy. You know, you get that, a little bit of that hit, a little bit of that boom, but it's not muddy at any point in my listening experience. And I think what I like so much about this particular planar is the mid-range is very neutral and natural sounding, and just vocals in general, instrumentals sound very good on this particular planar. It's tuned very well for those purposes. And I do think that if you like the mid-range for a planar, this is definitely a very easy recommendation for a audio listening experience. Now, I thought that that would transition well into a gaming scenario, but I do have to say that surprisingly, the Dunu Talos is actually the worst out of all three of these IEMs for competitive gaming purposes. There is almost no verticality on the Dunu Talos at all. And I actually took a lot of notes on the Dunu Talos, because it is just something that is so bizarre to me that it can have quite a lot of technicality in music. And again, it's a perfect and prime example of that technicality not transitioning into gaming scenarios, particularly in Apex. Everything felt a little bit too close. There was very bad separation, even more so than something like the Z12. And there was just absolutely no height or elevation in that playing field. Everything that was above me sounded on the same level. Everything below me sounded on the same level. And there's just too many things in game that sounded shouty, in the sense that that separation was just very overwhelmed and not technical in providing me the ability to hear footsteps that were going on simultaneously. And again, in gaming scenarios, you're getting a lot of the same frequencies. If two people are shooting a 301 and you're shooting a 301, you know, how well does something separate out three of the same frequencies or three of the same playbacks at the same time? The Dunu Talos does not do a good job in providing you an accurate representation of where people are. Depth perception was off, and just generally speaking for Apex in particular, it was just not a good listening experience. In Valorant, they're actually a lot better than they are in Apex, but again, not something that I would recommend. You definitely do not have nearly as many issues as you do in Apex. But in Valorant, you definitely have a lot of these similar issues that we discussed on the Z12 in terms of, again, separation and just that pinpoint perception of where somebody is when they are behind an object, or particularly even on the Dunu Talos, more so than the Z12. If somebody's above you, or if you're in heaven and somebody's below you, they definitely struggle with verticality. And next up is the Stellaris, and I do just want to throw out that the Stellaris, in my opinion, looks pretty stunning. It's very different than other IEMs. I think the faceplate is awesome. Love the celestial designs from Moondrop. I just think that the IEM being in this full metal casing and having this long protruding piece of metal kind of coming from your ear into this heavy casing is a little bit too much for long gaming sessions. Not something that I found to be very comfortable when trying to grind for hours on end. For a lot of titles, this actually did sound fairly good, but there are things that can get a little bit overwhelming in terms of how bright these are. For instance, in Apex Legends, when you are spamming somebody with a 301 or a gun that is a little bit on those higher frequencies, and you hear that armor ticking, tick, 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 and then it cracks, it can be a little bit too much in game for long gaming sessions. Just in general, for how these sound for a playback experience, the bass and sub bass are definitely a lot more recessed than the Z12 as well as the Dunu Talos. Whereas the Dunu Talos is balanced, the Z12 is kind of more of a V-shaped. These are very emphasized on the upper mids and the highs. So you get very good detail retrieval in those regions, and you pick up on a lot of things in music because that sub bass and bass are a little bit recessed. And they sound good. It's just some things can be a little bit off, a little bit tinny, a little bit metallic-y or nasally. For instance, when you're listening to Kendrick Lamar or Jid, and they have kind of like those raspy voices, it almost turns into more of a nasally experience, and it's not the most enjoyable for what I prefer. I prefer a little bit more warmth, a lot more fun, while maintaining a nice neutrality and detail retrieval. But these are pretty interesting in just how different they are than other Planars. I enjoyed the music listening experience. I didn't think that it was too harsh or crude, given its tonality. A lot of tracks actually did sound very good, particularly Sublime actually sounded really good. Just a lot of some of the upper harmonics can get a little bit harsh and crude. But again, the detail retrieval actually is fairly good for an IEM. In terms of the soundstage, also for music listening purposes, it actually did feel quite wide. I would just say that for gaming purposes, sometimes in Apex Legends, it actually felt a little bit too wide and things felt a little bit recessed on that broad, expansive map, making the kind of emphasis required on who you need to focus on with priority a little bit harder. In terms of separation, it's not that much better than either of the two IEMs when a lot of things are going on. It's just, again, a struggle with planars with separation when a lot of the same frequencies are going on. And in terms of depth perception, though, it didn't do that bad of a job, and verticality was definitely better than the other two IEMs. Again, though, just falling a lot shorter than the Raptgo Hook X. Just the issues with separation, just not necessarily a pinpoint depth perception or the best verticality. These are not going to join the Wallhack tier list. So guys, a large portion of my life was devoted to playing professional CS in Call Invite for longer than 12 hours a day. And in terms of audio, I take audio pretty seriously for competitive purposes, always striving to have something that is adequate in whatever game I'm playing to provide me an experience for what I am looking for. And so far, the only planar, again, that I have listened to in terms of IEMs that has been in any way, shape, or form decent for both Apex Legends and Valorant, other tag shooters as well, like Counter-Strike Global Offensive, I would probably say the Raptgo Hook X is still the only one that is going to remain on my list and is still number 2 on the Wallhack tier list. I hope that helped, guys. If it did, please leave a sub to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next review. Peace.